What if an album wasn't just a collection of songs? What if it was a story? A story about someone looking back on their life, remembering the people they've loved, confronting death and trying to figure out what the hell any of it meant. That's what makes the Black Parade so interesting, because underneath the costumes, the huge guitars, and the ridiculous amount of drama, and the absolute chaos, there's actually a story here. And today I want to talk about why the Black Parade isn't just an album, it's an experience. The story begins with someone known as the Patient, and well, he's dying. Not exactly the happiest way to start an album, but instead of immediately throwing us into a depressing funeral, the album starts by showing us memories. The Patient's looking backwards. He's remembering his childhood, his family, his relationships, and the things he did, and the things he wished he'd done differently. And that's important because the Black Parade isn't about dying. It's about looking at your entire life when you suddenly realise that you don't have forever. And I think that's what makes the story so interesting. Because death's obviously a massive part of the album, and it's really using the death to talk about life. And then the actual music kicks in. In the end, immediately tells you what kind of album you're about to hear. It's dramatic, it's theatrical, and it's loud. And it feels like you're watching this opening scene of some massive musical. And then you get Dead, which is probably one of the strangest ways you can make a song about death, because it's fun, energetic, and catchy. It's almost sarcastic, and I think that's one of the biggest strengths of the Black Parade. It doesn't treat every dark subject like it needs to sound miserable. Sometimes it's sad, sometimes it's angry, and sometimes it's completely ridiculous. And somehow those things work together. As an album continues, we start to understand the world that the Patient exists in. And this is where the album starts feeling less like a collection of songs and more like an actual journey. The Patient isn't simply thinking, I'm gonna die. He's thinking, what did my life actually mean? That's a much bigger question. He's thinking about the people he's met, the people he's loved, and the people he's lost, and the mistakes he's made. And I think that's something almost everyone can understand, because you don't have to be dying to look back at your life and wonder if you've done enough, whether you've made the right choices, and whether people will remember you, and whether your life actually mattered. That's what makes the album feel surprisingly human underneath all the theatrical stuff, the music. But obviously I'm not just here to explain the story. I want to talk about the music, and Jesus Christ, the album is huge. The guitars are huge, the drums are huge, and the vocals are huge. Everything sounds like it's been turned up to 11, but that's what I really like. It's got aggressive moments, it's got emotional moments, it's got incredibly catchy songs, and it's got quieter sections, and then suddenly the album's throwing something completely different at you. It could have become easily a mess, but somehow it feels like everything belongs in the same world, and that's not easy to pull off. One of the biggest things that make the Black Parade stand out is how theatrical it is. Everything feels exaggerated, the outfits, the artwork, and the performances, the music and the characters. Even the ways the songs are structured. And normally, that much drama could become annoying really quickly. But here, I think it works because the album contains and commits to it completely. It doesn't feel embarrassed about being dramatic. It doesn't try to make itself smaller. It basically says, yeah, we're going to make this massive. And I respect that. Because even if you don't personally like the style, you know exactly what this album's trying to be. But there's another part of the story that I think is easy to overlook. Death doesn't only affect the person who's dying, it affects everyone around them, the people they love, the people they hurt, the people who are going to remember them. And that's where this album becomes much more emotional, because the patient isn't just thinking about what happens to him, he's thinking about what happens after him. What does he leave behind? Who remembers him, and what kind of person he was? That's honestly one of the most interesting ideas in the entire album, because eventually everyone leaves something behind. Maybe it's memories, maybe it's relationships, maybe it's the way they changed someone else's life, and the Black Parade keeps coming back to that idea. Now, this is where I want to stop analysing the album for a second and start to think about what I like. For me, the biggest strength of the Black Parade is how memorable it is. Even if you don't remember every detail of the story, you'll probably remember moments from the music. You'll remember huge choruses, you'll remember guitars, you'll remember the vocals, you'll remember the theatrical atmosphere, and most importantly, you'll remember how the album felt. That's the struggle I think a lot of albums mess up. You can make something technically perfect and still leave no impression, but the Black Parade absolutely has an identity. You know what you're listening to, and I think that's important. But it's not perfect. I don't want this video just to be saying, this album's amazing, because that would be boring. The theatrical style isn't going to work for everyone. If you don't like dramatic vocals, huge production, or music that constantly feels like it's trying to put on a show, you're probably going to find parts of this album exhausting. There are definitely songs that are going to hit harder for some people than others. For me, that's one of this album's weaknesses. Its biggest strength is also its biggest risk. It commits to its style so heavily that if you don't connect with that, there's really nothing you can do. But personally, I'd rather listen to an album that takes a huge swing and doesn't work perfectly for everyone than something completely safe and forgettable. Eventually, the story has to end. The patient has spent the entire album looking backwards at his childhood, his relationships, his regrets, and his fears. And eventually, he has to stop looking backwards and face what's ahead. Death. And this is where the entire idea of the Black Parade comes back around. The parade that once represented a memory from his childhood has become something completely different. It's now connected to his own death. And that's what makes the title so effective. The Black Parade isn't just a cool name, it's part of the story. It's a symbol of everything the patient has experienced, everything he's lost and everything he's leaving behind. So, is the Black Parade one of the greatest albums ever made? Honestly, I can understand why people think it is. For me, the biggest achievement isn't just one song. It's the fact My Chemical Romance managed to create an entire world. They didn't just make music, they created characters, an aesthetic, a story, a sound, and an album that feels like one complete experience. Even if you don't like every song, even if you don't connect with every part of the story, it's hard to deny how much personality this album has. It knows exactly what it wants to be. It's dramatic, it's emotional, it's loud, it's weird, and it's sometimes ridiculous. And it completely committed to itself. And I think that's why people are still talking about it. The Black Parade is a story about death, but underneath all that, it's a story about life, about memories and regret, about the people we leave behind, and about trying to make our lives mean something before they end. And maybe that's why this album has lasted, because eventually, everyone has their own Black Parade.